last night, or just a few hours ago, a historic moment, really, to see Kamala Harris stand there and accept the nomination of the from the Democratic Party for the forthcoming election. You know, somebody of black heritage and Indian heritage. And we were saying earlier, and you'll know this as a politician, I mean, 2 months ago, she wouldn't have even thought she'd be in this position. So to step up like that, and to, you know, really take that position in front of thousands, it's quite something, really. It takes a particular kind of character.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary what's happened, because only 2 months ago, President Biden was the candidate, and then, of course, he did that appalling debate, and then there was the assassination on Trump.
Assassination attempt.
And then they got and then, of course, he's still alive.
He's still alive.
And then, of course, they got rid of Biden, and they replaced him with Kamala Harris. So it's a big moment. And this cycle, I mean, I've been following American politics, like many viewers, I suppose, for many years. There's been nothing like it. And as you say, it's very significant that she's the first woman of colour, and also that she's got a real shot as being the first female president.
Yeah.
All I'd say about that is that I remember 2016, and there was a huge amount of excitement about Hillary Clinton potentially being the first president. I looked at the polls just now, and she was actually further ahead than Kamala Harris is now.
Right.
And you're against the same opponent in Donald Trump. So I think it's still 50-50, very close.
Yeah.
But she's clearly got lots of momentum behind her.
Yeah.
Ava, what did you make of how she did? Because, you know, talk about pressure when it comes to standing up and delivering that kind of speech. And it's the first time she's sort of not spoken, has she? We've learnt more about her in that speech, I think.
But, I mean, still not learnt very much. You know, I think underneath the pomp of, you know, having, you know, the Obamas there and having Oprah and John Legend with this, you know, magnificent, huge spectacle. Underneath all of that, there's not a lot of policy and there's not a lot of, you know, I would say principle. You know, there's been a huge row that has developed over a Palestinian voice that was not allowed to speak on the stage last night, despite multiple other voices being allowed to be present. I mean, I know that there is a rather large group that's, Muslims for Kamala Harris have now pulled their support for her, and that is almost co-signed by AOC, who's a huge figure in the Democrat Party. What I basically mean is there's massive spectacle, and underneath all of that, we're not really getting to the nitty-gritty of what she actually believes in.
But I thought it was quite interesting on the Israel-Gaza scenario, is that actually she could have avoided it, and she was expected to avoid it. And I think not only did she just mention it, she went quite far, I thought. Let's just hear it a little bit. This is only part of what she'd said when she addressed both the Israeli and Gaza crisis at the moment.
President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
I mean, I think that's quite powerful. We haven't heard that enough from many Western leaders, both this side of the pond and over in America.
But you've got to look at the domestic political situation. I mean, states like Michigan, particularly Michigan, it's got a big Arab-American population. And she really has to win that to be able to win the race in November. So I think a lot of that is obviously going to be messaging the domestic audience. And she's decided that she must show support for Palestine. Yeah. Because that's the only way that she can...
And I have to say, in the longer clip, she does also talk about Israel's right to defend itself. I mean, she didn't, you know, she didn't pull any... True. She didn't try to, you know, just please one side of the argument. And that was also the theme of the speech in a way that it did feel unifying. I mean, we've heard speeches both this side of the pond and there, which have been quite divisive from political leaders when it comes to election. This populism, this sort of choosing one side. But I think her attempt was to try and bring people together.
Sure. I mean, there's also an argument that perhaps a lot of her campaign is, you know, is dependent on Trump being a pretty terrible prospect. I wonder if it reminds you a little bit of your campaign that was run just a few months ago, which was essentially Labour's big pitch was, well, you don't want to have the Conservatives in anymore, so you should vote for us. It sort of does have echoes.
Quite a negative.
Quite similar.
But look, I think the expectation on her is huge. I mean, it was obvious to me and to most people that Biden was probably going to lose. That was where the betting and the sentiment was. Now she has to win. That's the whole point. That's why she's there. And she has to keep her coalition together. And it's a big, broad coalition. There are people who are very pro-Israel in the Democratic Party, and there are people who are very anti-Israel and pro-Palestine. And in order to knit that together, she can't be divisive. She has to bring people together in order to win. Now, Trump's strategy will be, as you know, a different strategy. You know, he'll be trying to focus on her record. He can't do it because he's an entertainer and he likes the nicknames and that sort of thing. But he needs to have more discipline, focus on her quite left-wing, by American standards, economic record. And then maybe he has a chance. But it's very balanced at the moment.
It was interesting, wasn't it? We were sort of watching out for how she would reference Donald Trump, what she would say about him. You know, would it be overly critical? Would it be jokes at his expense? And we can just hear a bit about what she said specifically when she was talking about him cozying up to autocrats. Let's listen to this bit.
I will not cozy up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un who are rooting for Trump. Because, you know, they know he is easy to manipulate with flattery and favors. They know Trump won't hold autocrats accountable because he wants to be an autocrat himself.
I mean, that was kind of her overriding message, that he's in it for himself. And Ava, do you think, you know, all she has to do, she sort of has to talk about what has happened to him, and she referenced again his convictions, what's gone on, the riots. You know, there are a lot of things that she can pull out of that to remind people about his past.
Sure, but then if you are perhaps one of the voters that does believe that this is a huge conspiracy against Trump, then this would only solidify your position. I think, you know, we are in two very entrenched camps now. I don't think that you're pulling anyone over from the Republican side who might believe that, you know, Trump has been unfairly treated.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think also that what she said about the dictators, a lot of his base like him because he's a strong man. They like the fact that he's a bit of a dictator and he's tough and he'll be hard with people. So, as Ava said, it's very polarizing.
All eyes on Trump now, though, his response. And, you know, these speeches are very carefully worded to try and get a reaction. And, you know, he will want to respond to these autocrats.
I think the Democrats are much smarter now. I mean, he's been around for 8 years. He's been a candidate. This is his third presidential election. So they're much cleverer, I think, at dealing with him. And the way, I think, to go for someone, he's got a very brittle ego, even more than most politicians I've met. And the way to go for him is to tease him and mock him. And that clearly just drives him crazy. And I think they've got a good line in saying that he's weird, he's a bit sort of slightly unhinged, he's a bit crazy.
From your experience in Westminster, are you aware of that as a politician, that sometimes people can attack you personally and almost not to respond to that and stick to policy, stick to the strategy?
100%. I can't remember who it was. It was someone in New Labour who said, the self-control of the politician is actually the most important thing because you can't get too riled. People say all sorts of things about people, but you've got to just stay focused on what you're trying to do.
Do you have people around you that remind you of that, or is that all down to you? Does somebody say, listen, Kwasi, you might have seen this in the paper, don't respond to it?
That's right, but you've got advisors all the time. I mean, Trump has loads of advisors. But the issue about advice is that it's only as good as someone's likeliness to take it. You can have the best advice in the world, but if you don't follow it, it's useless.
Which does remind us, perhaps, maybe of the mini budget. I do believe that you know, we were told not to go down that route.
No, we talked about it extensively yesterday. I'm happy to talk about it all day long.
All right, off we go.
Something else we talked about yesterday, which we were previewing this announcement on this Alzheimer's drug, the treatment that has been approved to be used, but it's not been approved for use on the NHS. And it's on the front of papers this morning, the Mail and the Express. Why is it only the rich can get Alzheimer's wonder drug? That's in the Express and the Mail. Furious dementia drug denied to patients on NHS. And they say that the benefits are too small to justify the £30,000 a year cost. I mean, Ava, it's always when they look at sort of the benefits of these things, how much it's going to cost, but this is going to be a heartbreaking decision for the hundreds of thousands of people that it potentially would have been able to help.
It's an incredibly tricky story because it's available privately. So if you can afford private healthcare, you can afford that luxury, then you can have access to this drug. But the way that it's being billed, I think, by the NHS, or the decision that has been taken, is because there are many risks with it. You know, there are side effects that include bleeds on the brain, and this can affect up to 2% of people who take the drug, which is rather large. And so, I suppose the cost benefit there, can we spend tens of thousands of pounds while there are many risks? The other argument to this, which I think that people will be rather upset about, is that with the NHS we have a huge issue with bed blocking, and I suppose that there will be people who theorise, well, are they not allowing us to have this drug because it would be more convenient perhaps for the exchequer or for the taxpayer if certain people can get older quicker and then pass on? And I think that will rightly upset people.
I think that's quite cynical. But you can't get around the fact that there are limited resources. There are always going to be limited resources, and you've got to make a judgment as to whether it makes sense for the benefits to spend that much money. And what they've done now is to say, actually, the benefits aren't great enough. As someone having been in politics, I'd be very worried about side effects, because that's the sort of thing that comes up.
The trials of this show, it slows cognitive decline by 27% over 18 months. And, we had Dr. Hillary talking about this yesterday and saying that there are those people that has side effects for, but there are ways that you can screen to sort of minimise those effects to make sure that those people aren't
But
using the
if
drug.
those people have, really serious illnesses as a consequence of the drug, it'll be politicians who will be held at account.
But the fact that they're still allowing the drug to be out there if you've got the money to pay for it. And there is always adverse effects and stuff. And I'm glad we led with this yesterday morning, like many other news broadcasters weren't doing so, because what this gets down to the bottom of the matter is that if you've got money, you can get the health that you need. And if you haven't got the money, you can't. And that is an injustice. And it almost completely defies what the NHS is supposed to be there.
I think it's very difficult. And also, we've got an ageing population. And the cost of these drugs, generally, the cost of medicine is going up. So that's the sort of thing that Rachel Reeves and the Health Secretary are going to have to balance. And there are no easy answers to that. Obviously, we'd love to have limitless resources and pay for all of these medicines and treatments.
Talking of healthcare, the other news story is immigration figures. They are down, and if you look at that, and people at home go, well, that's great, isn't it? That's exactly what we want. But when you think about healthcare workers, down by over half. I think we reported a few weeks ago, the healthcare visa applications down by 86%. That is catastrophic. We heard yesterday, I was watching ITV News last night, and there was a care home worker saying, if we can't get workers over here, we might have to close down. This is a policy that the Conservative government put in place to stop workers bringing their families over. And it's actually self-harm, isn't it? This is creating horrible self-harm on us as a country.
No, I think in any immigration policy, it's quite a broad and blunt instrument, and you've got to try and fine-tune it. What's very clear is that the rates of immigration, legal as well as illegal, have shot through the roof over the last few years. And the government, Rishi Sunak's government, were very keen to try and reduce the number. And I think they were right. I think that was where the public was. Now, when you look underneath the bonnet, you're right to say that there are different pressures and there are different needs, and that needs to be addressed. But there's no doubt that the overall policy to try and bring those numbers down is the right one.
You say that, Kwasi, but then we hear from economists and say, well, healthcare is down, hospitality is down. Universities are saying, my old university, Huddersfield, saying if we don't get foreign students in, we are going to struggle.
But there's a balance. But you can't. The answer can't be just to let everybody who wants to come
no one's saying let everybody in.
Exactly.
But is there a need, Ava? Is there a need for a more honest conversation about immigration? What we hear is that low immigration is good. Well, actually, it's not good. It's never been good for this country.
Well, we've always had a shock jock conversation, I think, about immigration. It's either, big numbers bad, low numbers good, which is rather nonsensical. I think one of the worst things that the previous administration did was try to classify low-skill versus high-skill immigration. So care workers were categorised as low-skill workers. Now, if anyone has ever had a carer in their home or looked after their loved one, you know that is not a low-skill job. Yes, it's an incredibly important job. These people do things that I personally could never, ever do. And again, that policy came with them now not being allowed to bring their families into this country. And I think that sort of denigration that we put on people, obviously it's not going to attract people to come to this country. And now that's what you're seeing.
So you yourself said that, obviously nobody's saying that we should let everyone in. But once you've established that, you've got to have rules and policies to try and restrict the numbers, because you've just said that we need some sort of
but I think there needs to be long-term plans. At the moment, you can't suddenly go, well, we're going to stop this overnight, which literally the Conservative government, within months, just said, right, we're stopping care workers bringing their family. That has an immediate effect. Have a long-term strategy. Train people up over here. Have something really long-term that we can... But it's not happening enough.
You may be right, but any immigration policy is going to have that issue, because you've got to try and restrict numbers, you've got to try and manage the flow of people that come into this country. And then after you've done that, you've got to look at the skills that you need. So there's always going to be a balance in terms of what the country needs. What would you say now to these care homes who are saying that we are 20-30% down on staff? What do you say to them? So what I would have liked to have had is some sort of point system where you essentially try and calibrate people coming in to the needs that you have as an economy. As you said, we do need immigration. We do need people coming in. but it's always a matter of the numbers. It's always a matter of degree. And that's where I think, tough decisions have to be made. That's
Ava,
what
is that
government's about.
But we do already have that. You do already have to apply for a job here before you get a visa. Care homes, they do allocate visas for people. So I'm not really sure how that would change much.
Do you think the Labour government will change the narrative? Do you think at some point they will say, look, I think we need to look again at our attitude to immigration, or will they keep this slightly hard line? Because they sort of gave us a lot of anti-immigration narrative as we were leading up to the election, didn't they?
Well, this is what's interesting, was I think that they had a real opportunity after the riot to do an entire reset on the language around immigration. And I think following on from that, we've just had this huge announcement about small boats and detaining people who come off the channel. Do I think that was the right time to introduce that narrative? No, I don't. I think that we could have a really sensible conversation about immigration that is not, excuse me, but the bluster that we've had for the past 14 years.
So you're right that they could have reset, but they clearly didn't, because they realise that in many of their constituencies, their constituents are very concerned about this issue. And when we consider, we can have a lovely debate, but Reform got 4 million votes at the last general election, and most of those voters, I would suggest, feel that immigration levels are too high, and they want to have a government that has a robust approach to that.
But that's because they're being told that immigration is bad for the economy, and they're being told that they don't have a job at the moment because of immigration, which is simply not true.
The immigration debate will continue. We are speaking to a couple of amazing guests in a short while, just after 7, who are Afghan students, Tamina and Zara, who were studying medicine in Afghanistan until the Taliban took over, could no longer study. And this is probably because there's no safe and legal routes. In the end, a charity had to help them come over. And they're now in Scotland, and they want to give something back to Scotland and this country. It's a wonderful story. I look forward to speaking to them a bit later.
And do you know what we're also counting down to, which will be in about 10 minutes' time now? It's the announcement on the new energy price cap. And we are expecting that bills will go up by 9%. So this is sort of the average bill. It's basically the average, the maximum amount that energy companies can charge per unit of energy. But, I mean, Ava, it's not good news for people, is it? When we're coming into winter, times are hard for families anyway. They're now hearing that their energy bills are going to be going up. We know that for a lot of pensioners, they're going to be losing their winter fuel allowance. Yet again, it means that we're sort of plunging into times where people are facing choices about heating or eating.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you'll remember that.
I remember that. I lived through that. I was the energy secretary when Putin invaded Ukraine, and gas prices shot up and the price cap went up. I mean, it was a very difficult time.
I think the winter fuel allowance is extremely difficult. I mean, I think taking that away is one of those quote-unquote hard choices. I would actually like to see something more across the board. You think about people who are on the lower end of the income, particularly students who can't turn their heating on. They're suffering as well. There needs to be some sort of French intervention, similar to what they have done there, where you can assist people in paying their bills. And look, we've talked about green energy over and over again. At one point in time, 1/5 of our energy was coming from wind. And we're still having the same conversation now about whether or not we should build in people's backyards new wind turbines. This is a good example that we should.
This is all pegged on the wholesale prices, isn't it?
Yeah, it's generally the gas price that determines the price cap. That's what's sort of driving it.
So is it really acceptable to allow it to go up by 9%, though?
Well, it's not the government that's doing it. It's Ofgem, and it's independent. And they have a formula which they use, which calculates where the price cap ends up.
But then if you look at other countries, they did ease, some governments did ease the burden of that price cap. So they did provide a sort of base level.
I mean, that was one of the... prelude to the mini-budget was a very, very generous energy intervention, which some analysts say was what tipped things over, because it was such a huge commitment to cap the price, I think, at 2,500. But you're right to say that, if we have more renewables, that gives more flexibility to the system.
Because we're not so reliant on the wholesale price. And what do you make of the winter fuel allowance and the removing that from some 10 million pensions?
I was very... Because that, when you're in Treasury, you always get a basket of things that says, well, you can do this, you can do that. And the winter fuel payment was something that was... most political analysts said was too difficult to remove, and also you're affecting older
What are they thinking there? What's the thought process there?
I think it's just a way of saving money. And you've got to... The government's come in. They've been very bold, I mean, to be fair, but they've come in, they've done settlements for the unions and for public sector workers, and something had to give. Something has to be reduced in terms of expenditure to pay for those settlements. And the Chancellor and her advisors decided that taking away the winter fuel payment was the best way to do this. Now, I don't think that was the right policy, but that's what they've done.
Just very quickly on the energy bills, I know what people will be saying when they hear on the news bulletins that prices are going up. Immediately the response is, What about the profits that these energy companies are making? What about the salaries and the bonuses some of these bosses are taking? Do you think we're doing enough as a country to regulate that?
We did that. I mean, when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, and I actually opposed this move because he brought in what's called the energy price levy, which is essentially a windfall tax on the North Sea. Now, my issue with it was that essentially you're driving away people from investing in energy, which is domestic energy. So if you don't produce gas yourself, you just have to import it from other countries. But we have got a windfall tax, and I think Rachel Reeves has said that she's going to extend that. Right. And there are other ways, I'm sure she's looking at them, to tax those businesses.
Quickly touch on, before we run out of time, it's on a lot of the front pages today, the story about Jermaine Jenas being axed from the BBC over text to women. That's the front page of The Sun today. Now, we don't know the exact circumstances of what's gone on here. He has said there are two sides to every story and he will let his lawyers deal with it, but there's no doubt, Ava, is there, that, you know, the BBC have taken swift and decisive action on this one?
Sure, which was, I suppose, not action that was taken during the radio show that he was allowed to host until quite late in the evening yesterday. It was actually rather extraordinary. All of these allegations were piling in and he was still on air.
But it wasn't it was another broadcast.
It was another broadcast.
It wasn't at the BBC. And in that moment, I think, you know, they weren't...
But sure, I mean, look, the BBC have had to learn some, you know, really hard lessons from not taking decisive action over the past couple of years, and I think that this is an example.
You do wonder, Kwasi, whether it is a sort of something they're learning from the Hugh Edwards scenario. We don't know the details of this. I mean, we don't know whether we can compare the two, but still whether there's a lesson.
Adil, you're absolutely right. I think they got burnt slightly with the Hugh Edwards. I mean, they paid him 400,000, whatever it was, and half the time he was
So he was suspended on full pay, wasn't he?
That's right, and it was all a bit slow. That was a perception, and I think now they've wanted to act very quickly.
OK, look, both, we are talking festivals later and whether it's OK to send your 16-year-olds. Ava, I don't need to ask you, I'm sure you were probably a raver, but Kwasi, come on. When you were 16, 17, were you at festivals raving? Come on.
No.
Were you part of the helter-skelter crowd at the M25?
I was worried about my A-levels.
No, come on.
Do you think it's OK for 16-year-olds to go to a festival? Or would you be letting your child at 16?
Do you have children, Kwasi?
I've got but they're much younger than that.
Right.
When they get to 16.
So I think it's all about, because I would say this, I think it's all about individual responsibility, and you've got to judge and calibrate what the individual. Some 16-year-olds, fine. Others will be a lot more vulnerable.
Is that what you say to your own kids? Or not?
She doesn't speak.
You
barely speak.
Ava,
Daddy says.
What do you make of it?
I think they're fine. I think you need to go and you can be in a contained environment and you can work out whether you can actually manage for yourself for a weekend. It's great.
And Charlotte's line earlier was great. And St John Ambulance isn't far away.
Yeah, the medical attention's there. Or you just follow a few steps behind with some sort of disguise on and hope they don't notice. Thank you both very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you.